Even though we still may be months out from Election Day, it's safe to say that 2016 is shifting the political landscape, fracturing parties along new fault lines and challenging labels such as Republican or Democrat. There are pundits who say this year will reshape American politics and parties as we know them. Let's bring in Hans Noel, a professor of government at Georgetown University. His most recent book, Political Ideologies and Political Parties in America, he explores the role of both in American politics. Hans, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
I'm really glad that you're here because I want to put it in a historical context. The rise of the outlier, of the outsider, is that something that we have never seen before? Is this election cycle a complete anomaly, or has this happened in the past?
Well, parties have always been divided and have always had insiders and outsiders. And so we've certainly seen outsider candidates win before. We've certainly seen candidates who were unpopular within their own party, sometimes when McGovern and Goldwater being two obvious examples. But the big difference is that this is a case of an outsider who is so outside that, Trump doesn't seem to have a lot of experience with how to be a politician, which is why he's causing a lot of the missteps that we've just been talking about.
One of the things that we've been hearing so much is that he was really just riding a wave. So it's almost as if the GOP was vulnerable to an outsider. Is that a safe statement to make, or is this outsider theme that we're seeing solely because he's in the race?
No, I think that the GOP was vulnerable to an outsider. I think it was vulnerable in particular because there's been a divide within the Republican Party that has nothing to do with Trump. It's between, conservative ideologues, more Tea Party type candidates, Ted Cruz, and then a more establishment, more party regular types, Jeb Bush. And that divide, usually, a party manages to paper it over and find some candidate who can bridge them. They failed to do that this year, and so that created an opening. But Trump was only able to take advantage of that opening because he was able to tap into a bunch of voters who were already leaning towards the Republican Party but who felt they didn't have a standing.
Okay, so you talked about papering over. Can you give us some historical perspective? Has it been papered over in the past, or I mean, I know you don't have a crystal ball, but I think I'm looking for you to give us a little preview of what you think.
Well, okay, so I mean, a good, to stick with our current example, a candidate like Marco Rubio could conceivably have appealed to both factions of the party, and yet the party decided they didn't want him as their choice, and so that's, that failed to happen. But you could imagine that the party could find someone who could appeal to both factions. They had to do the same thing in Congress about a year ago when John Boehner stepped down, and both factions of the Republican Party then weren't sure what to do, and they found somebody in Ryan to bridge the divide, and I'm sure they can find someone who could do that again.
It's only safe for us to talk about the Democratic side as well. There's been so much talk that Bernie Sanders had so much influence bringing in progressives into this election. They talked about him reshaping the DNC platform. Is it true that the left has never been this left before, or is that also something that we've seen in history before? We just need to take the time to look back. Sure.
I mean, it's a little tricky because what it means to be left has changed a lot. But certainly the Democratic Party under Roosevelt and the Democratic Party under, in the 1970s was very left, and even on some issues more left than the Democratic Party is today. But I think it's true that the Democratic Party, well, both parties had been moving to more ideologically pure places in the last couple of decades. Democrats had been moving in that direction, but Sanders has definitely pushed them a lot.
So what we think of a Democrat and what we think of a Republican may be completely changing.
And they may be completely changing. I think they're probably changing in a sort of, in a direction, right? So it's not going to be a complete jarring change, but what the parties stand for in 30 years probably won't be the same thing they stand for now.
Well, I guess buckle up.
Yes.
Hans, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Very interesting stuff.
Thanks for having me.
For political nerds, we like this stuff.
Sure.